Into the opening prayers in the yellow prayer book on page 3. 3 times. I take refuge in the Buddhas until I attain the essence of awakening. Likewise, I take refuge in the Dharma and in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. Just as the Buddhas of the past give rise to Bodhichitta and progressed along the Bodhisattva's path, so shall I give rise to Bodhichitta for the benefit of all beings and practice the stages of the Bodhisattva's path. I take refuge in the Buddhas until I attain the essence of awakening. Likewise, I take refuge in the Dharma and in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. Just as the Buddhas of the past gave rise to Bodhichitta and progressed along the Bodhisattva's path, so shall I give rise to Bodhichitta for the benefit of all beings and practice the stages of the Bodhisattva's path. I take refuge in the Buddhas until I attain the essence of awakening. Likewise, I take refuge in the Dharma and in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. Just as the Buddhas of the past gave rise to Bodhichitta and progressed along the Bodhisattva's path, so shall I give rise to Bodhichitta for the benefit of all beings and practice the stages of the Bodhisattva's path.
Kaju lama nanje da jon je dananda nazara damje da lama laba la ya jizo zon la zon yon den jam zon ala tendre don jendre begele zo jenje soda su jenje de na du son sheba me ya senge kan da ga ma le de da damje le dang ye dang we ja je wo da ga lo ju zon ro war zin ja lab do zor chu lam don ro war zin ja lab do lam tru wa ze war zin ja lab do zor ro wa ji zan ja war zin ja lab do zor kang ga den chen ro war jo ga ba me ba che ba me ba ta me Hwa me ban ro me ba ta de du me dun je me zhu ba nye je je dun ba zu ba san je ma nan je da ma de la xiang zar du ren jian za wa la ma je je gu zong de xin lan da 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 ge jue lan pe de da ge den ba da sin je je don jia jian ban ro bar sin je lab du so pa pa zang bu ju ba du ni lam zang shi ban den che ba ga re da tereng de xiak pa de che pa kap yin la du nang ke chan sa wa kong du song chu ban ba wa kong du xu sin da xiak pa de res da zhi dang e ji na ba la jin zong ju xu ba che ba yin na nga ran zu jiang qiu ge sen xi ban de Tapar go deba ina de la zhuan rou ji nyong du yu na ka ce go na yang ji bo yu ba de ge su su le sam no de ya gong pen ro de ba de ge pin do chen bo ji yu re de ne ta ba lan do an de yang ji ruan men rou ji bo ma yin ba ta ni ma re ne sim ji mang bo ji pa chen pen ro yu re de mang bo ji chur ji ba lin yong ge yu du to so ga am jo na na jang chok sim si ba dra cham ji jo thwa yi na sam ne gu long cham sam ji he yo re den ran ro je hyo yu bo kho re de ne yang nga ran zo jang chok sim si ba de ke zhuan ro de ma nyang na de je dang jang chok sim ge ja ma re ge ja gang yin jang de ma bo de yang se tu de na yang chang chang nyo de na yong se ge ro wa
So now we continue with the commentary on the prayer for excellent conduct, which is called the excellent path that accomplishes the twofold purpose. And we began with the 7 branches. So we already talked about prostration and making offerings, and today we continue with confession. And just to also, first of all, before we begin with that, to remind you, we always speak about bodhicitta. So you always hear about bodhicitta, and now if you have gained an experience, or if you have kind of tasted the flavor of bodhicitta, then the more you hear about it, the more happiness you experience, and the more this state of mind increases within yourself. And then if we always mention it, it's not actually not just for the people, human beings, the people who are listening to it, but actually each and every day, many sentient beings die, and many sentient beings are born. And so, therefore, sometimes I also do have the motivation to at least make this sound of bodhicitta heard for those beings, because it benefits them. On the other hand, if someone who has not experienced the flavor, the taste of bodhicitta, and that actually goes for anything that we talk about, whether we talk about bodhicitta all the time or we talk about anything else all the time, if you have not gained an experience of it, if you haven't tasted the flavor of it, then if you hear somebody say the same thing over and over again, it could be a little bit annoying and boring.
Yine ngaran so teting gorta. Dada kangli kibana ki jiwa tsolling kin tanda yore de jadong mambo. De la chancho sing bak cha thomar yo da je. Pa da kichi la teni keja sigdrup jig zoche de la simji mambo je pa jitin de na kha tan ro yore. Do so la chisam kechi thama senenta keje nchewa ke sem thama de yore tikap so yang. Dene je janchok sam shiba de amcho na ni pa Quran so ke hibat tole je yot bayina. Dene pardo la so benne kap so tarong chik ti tin hin daw de ke sin je karma nga cham karcha nga chon la je jikta so mai pardu jikta so chong ro tang ta bayina ya. Dene da 동다 첨부 좀 roddo yora. Dene da jirtang jancho sem de katse goba ina dene rintang yoba de per hyuba ina. Jo je parni atisha hyore jo je dapam kara yang hyore. Kong ke sangha ke lama do parsin ke lama da gebshini. Duncho doni ne chekti ma yin so. Daso tsama nange tani da jo selling ba ndeni tang da yin jiwak jancho ku semde da kong ku semnang la chik rwa yo ba no dek zu sons di jim seng da jo selling ba serende tani da jo je ke chin namju chala ngoya ke ja hu na la ba ni ga ke ja tani kandar chin chap se wa ta Kadu ti ke sin tund na tene ko jinchap sa ya tang tel so ba ke munen ze pang ngam sarji mambo shuya yore nda janju sungrin tang ne to na chwa de nyu da ba
And so then when sentient beings take birth, at any moment actually sentient beings take birth, if we're then able to put this imprint of bodhicitta into their mind, then it is already of a great benefit. Or when we are having a conversation for the duration that it takes us to complete one sentence, many sentient beings separate from this world, they die. And there is a significance to the very last moment of the dying mind, when one dies, the very last moment. And in the very last moment, if one is able to place this sound of bodhicitta into somebody's consciousness, then later, after they have died in the bardo, they will be able to remember it. There will be greater mindfulness. And then, even if it is just for 5 minutes or even 5 seconds, it is possible that through this sound of bodhicitta, for this short period of time, they will not be afraid in the bardo. And if that is accomplished, something very meaningful is already accomplished. So the more we understand the preciousness, the quality of bodhicitta, the more it also increases in our own mind. For example, in the past there was Jowo Adisha who told the Jowo Dibamkara that Adisha, he had met with many lamas, gurus of the secret mantra Vajrayana, and gurus of the Sutra Paramita vehicle. All in all, he relied on 72 masters. But among them all, it was the Master Selingpa who had really exchanged self with others, which means he put others before himself. And it was through the Master Selingpa that Atisha said, I had actually tasted the flavor, experienced the flavor of bodhicitta. And so therefore, whenever he thought of Selingpa or he just heard his name, he would instantly just join his palms together in prayer, and tears would fill his eyes. So that is, for example, when that happens, that is a sign that someone has realized the preciousness of bodhicitta.
Chanchok Sanyali de Gin la Pimpa Jibu Marirang la Pink Yobate, Kandachari Sina, Churan Chin Chutan Roji Chibayana, Chanchok Sem Karmanga la Gom, Churan Karma to Su de Sukala Yadan, Karmangala, Chanchok Sem Gom. Tiniti Jik, Chanchok Gom Bajini. Churan so Tinhi Yura Kare, Chongtina de Ma Debkal, Hojing Marti, Jambo, Ranjang Kang, Semnala Kareshana, Deva and Devicha, Deya. Tenita Karmanga Sala, Techuran Chadang Sanojanya, Tang, Yang de Marti. That de Hognik Tartokuti Yeti Yaldeg, Sosok Lora. Ta Deni, Tachanjo Senke, Sosor Kasi Pink Yura. And
then bodhicitta is actually not just something that is for the benefit of others, but actually it's also your own greatest benefit. So you can kind of test that. You can try something like an experiment. So sit down for 5 minutes and set your alarm clock for 5 minutes, like a stopwatch, and then meditate for 5 minutes on bodhicitta. And then after 5 minutes is over, then you still have this mindfulness of what you have meditated upon. So whatever you have meditated upon in those 5 minutes is clearly in your mind after 5 minutes when the clock goes off. And so then immediately pick up a pen and jot down whatever comes to your mind without even thinking about it. Completely honestly. It doesn't matter whether it is positive or negative. Just write down whatever is in your mind in that moment. And so if in those 5 minutes of meditation you did have thoughts of attachment and anger and so on, then you write that down. And then later, whatever you have written down, read it out loud to yourself and read it again. And then based on that, you can see how much benefit really comes from meditating on bodhicitta, even just for 5 minutes.
Churan yin simjin tamji ke donghar taso yi la sena ta taso dewa da dindu la soba ke kulong kun la lambo to ne churan mei nin chema ta trap sera nga san ta kandar ngoyi ta de yaba yina Dio Gini Kantar Chorang Mude Pari, the Chorang Simkan the Pet Lubo Chada Yuris. Yo, Tangar Chegonga, Sam Deniche Chadanke, the Samnotana, Chorang Kemo Geki Gek De Vaina, Tijin Samnojitana, then Simkam the Nantanatene, Madeva Pe Huchimbaji Yonga Yore. So Nyamjem test Chene Yabo Yore, Sosola. Oh, then that data will gun Kantar Chanchos and Gunalane thing, as okay, to hear the Kachimbo Inza, the Yukibain, then that there are Shabat capsule, Shabat la Dogsum Jimegeva, Gun along Shiba. There is.
So when you have when you have in mind during this experiment, when you have in mind the suffering of other sentient beings, and a wish to give them happiness arises in you, then it is possible that your eyes fill with tears and that you cry. But even though you cry on the outer level, your mind inside is completely relaxed. On the other hand, if you develop thoughts of attachment or anger, or thoughts of I want this or that, then even if you are like laughing out loud, actually inside in your mind you feel not right. There's a very strong feeling of discomfort. So just try to experiment with that. And so then coming to the teachings, I just wanted to mention that because it is very important to cultivate this motivation of bodhicitta, whether we are listening to the teachings or giving the teachings. And so now we come to the branch of confession. And in the text it says, how the way in which the three poisons give rise to the 10 non-virtuous actions.
That dogsum se dog segwa gares na ngaso dog hibadeke tsendeke ludan rewa yo bake so je yo rewa. Di so den chon rozite la dog suba en di so den chon ro yo luda semni kala ka chan ro yo rewa. Dog hyukchimok. 대 인도 ngaran so ke tharpa da thamjin chim ba ga da lopar da thamje je ba sanje je gonpan to ya ko so rawo de da jamning je la so ba ne da give chu thamje ro de mi ba zon ro kin rawo de de ni do cha hi dan timok sum bo de ri so le di cha ne de dog se yo ko je de re da de ke kun a lang do ne da le rawo je le ka kare chi ge si du Then Luji gone mege some ngag gone mege ye gone mege some de. Then it didn't mandu by your mark and mege your sayong your somebody.
So the reason why the three poisons are called poison is because they steal or deprive you of your life force. It's like your life force. So, for example, in this life, the mind is being connected to the body is due to the life force. And so, for example, if you if you eat poison, then the mind will separate from the body, so you will die, because poison is very powerful. So the life force for attaining liberation, or all-knowingness, or the state of enlightenment, the life force for enlightenment is love and compassion, and then all the virtuous actions. And that which destroys that life force are the three poisons of attachment, anger, and ignorance. Because they destroy life force, they are called poison. So when the mind is driven by the three poisons, then what do? With our body, we commit the three non-virtuous actions of the body. We commit the 4 non-virtuous actions of the speech and the 3 non-virtuous actions of the mind. So we commit the 10 non-virtuous actions. All negative actions really are actually complete within these 10 non-virtuous actions.
Tene chetan da docha tan hedani ke kunan lang ne ta lunga yi song ne ta dipa kan rab sagri sina te nga chu chama ke ha ko yo re tini ganglan de ke robson hyu ba re ta temo go ne kan ra sagri shi ba ti ko le chung ze hyu na ta teng sa hyu den da cha do yo re temo de kare cha ga yo re sena temo go ne pe na tambo tani soju bata wala chomba yena ta te mo go ne che o simjin de so je ne tani ya je dra je na tani la tham je thok jin ro res man ro ni yin la chewa je na tani de so ta che zo go ge wa chan ro res man de so tham je te mo go ne da soju ban de cha de yo res.
So it is mainly with a motivation, with a mind of attachment and anger that we commit negative actions. We commit negative actions of body, speech, and mind. And in general, we all know about that. And we already actually spoke about attachment and anger before, so now we talk a little bit more about ignorance, how we accumulate negative karma with ignorance. That's actually the most profound point of all of the afflictions. It's the most profound negativity is really accumulated with ignorance. So for example, in the case of killing, if one kills with an ignorant mind, then, for example, one kills an animal thinking that this will be an offering and it will please certain gods or deities. So it is this misconception of confusing violence against others for virtue. So this is ignorant karma, ignorant killing.
Tene perna dobe lobar yen bata be yin yang che ta na soso ga matan simo la so ba linda tene nyarpo se ta de tamji che mata simo so nyam de nyarpo se ne ta de tamji tene gewa la zene ta nyarpo nam chen ji ti mun ro dang de chen ta de yong ko yo ma ro ta na sim jin tamji ta ra yong ko mo do de yin yang gewa ji la zene tene ta ra che gewa de lam ni ta ra chi ngi 용거 요자 되는 데 담제다 저쪽으로 대목 왕 결선도 되는 내 난가로 돼 란더든 촉송아 나라를 차다 요래
Or for example, ignorance in the context of sexual misconduct is, for example, if one thinks it is virtuous, one thinks it's a good thing to do to, for example, sleep with one's mother or one's sister. And of course, this rarely happens in this world. It doesn't even happen between animals. But if one would consider this to be a good thing to do, a virtuous thing to do, then it is a sexual misconduct that is driven by the affliction of ignorance. So basically, one is kind of confusing or mixing up that which should be done with that which should be given up.
Tate ta mege bele siba ta demog gone gune lane kantar de zamon ke ha mo becha ga heri ma to de za ha dri de ni nga chu namju deni deba da pinsam ji ke yu se ne yang demog gune lane ji yong ba mambo je deni yang mege becha de ba mambo yong go yore de en zang aran zu namju chu rap de number ji bi shirap siba de 파르드 심바 쪽는 게데 히랍지 파르드 심바 시바데 가르친츠 고돈 저고돈 데레 다 히랍지 파르드 심반달라 군주 장sem다 돈당 장셈 니그난 게 돈당 장족 셈데 간달 히랍지 파르드 심바데 차도 요바레스 라인잔당 아란스 남야 준도 두조 탐제 당네양 드네 Ndava chala non rosa mambu yuza, the susu namju ge jie hin yamni nango yore.
So these are just a few examples of non-virtuous actions that we do with an ignorant mind, but it happens in many different ways. And so, for example, even though normally, generally, you have devotion and you do have a wish to benefit others, still we accumulate negative actions because ignorance really arises on so many different occasions all the time. And that is why this discriminating wisdom, that the discerning wisdom that discerns all occasions, is really important. So that is the perfection of wisdom of the 6 paramitas, and that's why it is so important. And in terms of bodhicitta, now we speak about 2 kinds of bodhicitta, the relative and the ultimate. And the perfection of wisdom is equivalent to the ultimate bodhicitta. And it is really essential to develop this discerning ability or discriminating awareness, because most of the times circumstances are quite similar. It's hard to really discern if it's really virtuous or non-virtuous. And so therefore, there are mistakes and traps all over. And therefore, it's important to develop this discerning wisdom.
Ta kandar megebel tamji soji ge zawade jo marek balatina so ko yore. Teni marek ba gona ne zawi nyumong ba drose. Teni zawi nyumong ba drog ne pa ye ndu nyewe nyumong ba ni sho se. Ta nyewe nyumong ba ni sho ne teni ta gundo ta to ba mambo yore. Ta de tanje ya drang ro de kandar da chupong je chi yidong ke panzer joba ke nyumong ba je chi yidong yo de yo bare. Dan de tamje teni ta ke le kang sa yaba ina yang megewa hiba de cha de yore. De ke megewa se de kang ri se na dambo ko jo nyumong ba de susu rangju le jien de teni sem de ma yawa se na hiwa ma yin ba dewa ma yin ba. Teni rebe de teni dong ha wa kran yi tra yin za teni sanje ta tham ke la tuji chimbo kong ke de da ba chur yin chi teni chim bu to ne teni landro ke nam ya de chur na yung ba re de de ta mege ba hiba ndala yondin ke yo ma re se re yin ya yondin jig drang ya yo ban de teni xiao ba ji cho ya ke de ko la yondin jin do se ta tena yin za teni nga zu ge da xiao ba ji go yo re.
And the root cause of why we accumulate all these negative actions is ignorance or unawareness. So driven by ignorance, first the 6 root afflictions arise. And then these multiply into 20 like secondary afflictions, and then they multiply more and more until we come to 84,000 different afflicted thought forms. And whatever action we engage in with an afflicted mind is called non-virtuous action, negative karma. And so then first, how it happens is an afflictive emotion arises within the mind. And when it arises, then the mind will feel not peaceful and not happy. And then in the end, it turns into suffering. And the Buddha, with great compassion and skillful means, knew exactly what can be done about that. And so therefore, the Buddha taught what should be practiced and what should be given up. it is said that, generally speaking, negative actions do not have any good qualities. But if they had one good quality, then it would be their potential to be confessed and thereby laid aside.
다 되는데 대바 탐지 대다 탐지 다그 소소르야 송 생난다 가자난다로 계란티난도 대그 가서 대바 협박이나 대그난다나 소소르야 히바데 다
답시랑 보면도
dana taung ko yoro
그래요.
sosorhya hibande dana deba soso gang jebar rabri no soso la ka soso jingo yoro so mate tong ra deba dan je soso ke tin ne tini te korang deba ra la te ke hyazi ke tini tab yoro da taso tam je tingo yoro is ke ti te hum bok anang sumba nang mar sumba nang do teninda dikpa hyaba ka tab ye yore te tab ye bonde sanje ke teni jamba yang dang teni janju simba jamba la suba teni kor gendu mambu nan sumba re teni papu chu ye dang tin ben ise tarati dikpa chim ben do so tena na sunga yore dan dan ma tin tamire is dikpa hyade
So in the blue prayer book on page 53, this is now verse number 3. It begins with, I confess every type of wrong that I have done. So every type also means that we have to bring all of these negative actions that we have committed to mind and then confess them, which also implies applying the antidote. The reason why we bring them separately to mind is because there is an antidote for all of these negative actions. And so there are 4 methods to lay aside, confess and lay aside negativities. And these were taught by the Buddha to a vast assembly of disciples, among them Manjushri, Bodhisattva Maitreya, and then a vast assembly of monks. And so what he taught on that occasion was the Mahayana Sutra on the confession of negativities, based on the confession which is based on 4 methods.
다 담보데 취게들에 인다 마유몰라 취게데 산제게 저다 다라 장조서 받으서 마송 저도 산제게 장조서 받 잠발 대송래 취 다라데 취게데 딘송아이나 되는데게 다 딕바탄제 서치 노마른 조로송 되니 된자 다니 데이터 취긴 여데 딘번도인데 라고 그리스 가능이 따도 라송도 따버 통도 야는 동거 그리스 가동지네 가동시데 다스 주마체 바니마르르 데라 가서 샹동라브야 데니 삼버차스 삼고요리 데크 난동데 데이터버리 데 주르레긴데 데이터버리 야스 곰버샤오선도 다디 삼사두 삼바데라 곰고요리서 데니 다 데이터 was 중앙이나 아더니 니버제베 제베 니바 세열 탐제다 저던 제베다 제바 탐제 다 순진의 미바치도 요래선데 산제 무슨 송바래.
Before the Buddha taught on those 4 dharmas, he said to the Bodhisattva Maitreya that if you possess those 4 dharmas, these 4 dharmas will outshine all negativity. Therefore, you should always recite confession each and every day like a prayer. And you should also reflect upon it. And you should also practice it, meditate on it. If you practice in this way, then all negativity, cause and result, can be completely destroyed. So this is what the Buddha himself had said.
Dangbo de la number Sunjimba, Kundu Juba song. Kundu Juba Sidita, do the number Gunda, take Yamlin the Jigo, your Batichanary. Sunjimba send Sun Danjin, Sern the Garis and jeans in the Pami Babs in the Darwa, Suns the color noon or Jiba de Chadu, take the bag. That then the dinner could. Sun jeans da pagapano jaya grova. Nu bano. The dipa in a college that Narana Sajo, Natella Cateno Jaya Gurova. Then the Kantan Jubal Rale Juba. Digpa gang the gang Sabaina and Juba Mina helping Manda somebody. They wounded Nana Yorjitang or Devachik Mulan and Sir. Chamiraga Seketema Sigdra Dangaras doing woman to Opa Candon Yori. Then the time Dara de Digpal and Jupachi Goyor. Jupachi Goyor is Yoria. Didn't do dinner Sunda. Chuya the Rasan.
Shiba Kangshena Teta, the number Sunjiba Kundus.
They chap Sanjama, Lord of the Sona, the number Sunjiba Kundu Juba name, give a leti and a telling Juba Mamaino.
So then he gave teachings on those 4 dharmas, and he said that the first dharma to practice is the practice of remorse or regret at all times. So at all times one should feel regret for what one has done wrong. And so this term remorse here in Tibetan consists of 2 syllables. It's sunjin, and sun means first jin, the second syllable means to obliterate, and sun means harm. So that which obliterates harm is the kind of direct translation for remorse. So it means remorse. So actually, what determines the removal of one's negativities, it all depends on whether or not we regret what we have done wrong. It is said that if one does not fully regret what one has done wrong, then also this negativity will not become purified or laid aside through any confession. So this is taught here. It is also taught in the Amitabha Sutra, and actually it is in the wishing prayer of Deva Chen by Chagme Raga Asya, but it is actually also extracted from that sutra, the Amitabha Sutra. So here it says that the first and most important point of laying aside and purifying any negativity, anything wrong, is to feel a regret, to feel remorse.
Sun Jipakapso, that call Cap Dipa, the less Dipulesa Yabatella Kate Jadano, Carre Serdu, the name Magawata, the Dipatella, Soso Glesa Yabatella, Magawata, the Joa Jiva, the Sinon Joa Yobata, the name Yin Sewa, dan senang do ko la chonang mi ba ta te ta we yong go yo re su sun shi ba kaps ta tendra ji widu teni te ta sun chu nga ke tendra ji ya mo do si ta te ngune le chap chin ji sa yu do ne ngin pa ji sa yu do kandar teni tendra ji ta mong pa la teni na ya ji ni ke mo do si ten ta te han de lan ju ba na wo de hyok chen bo ji ya lang go yu ba re.
So when we regret, when we feel remorse, then with remorse, how do we then really oppose, like kind of get rid of these negativities in our mind, this feeling of remorse? How do we really develop it? So it is to, first of all, think about the negative thing you have done and to feel a dislike, to know that this is wrong, and also to feel sad that you have committed that in the first place, and also a sense of like repulsion where you feel that it doesn't feel good, you don't want to do something like that. And then also to think in the future, I will not do this again, I will not repeat this. Now I have accumulated a real heavy and negative karma. In the future, I must never do this again. So this is how we develop, how we give rise to this strong feeling of regret.
Jerdang ar chon roa ma sewa de che khen sa wan ro je yorwa ma che ge thuma che non chur ji che wa de ko pan ta de non chur zong kin ban ro je san na dang yorwa teni ga he ge ta de non chur zo no yo re de yin ya di da dang bo non chur zo non chur la non chur ngulin dang teni ko xiak ba la so ba je na den yuan ro ya yo re de yuan ro ya yo ba de chuni re de za ta dara ngaran so ge dikpa de la yang teni de ta wa ta ju ba be ne ta ngaran so su je ge nga ju mi yong din tam che de de ma mai set to go yo ma re ju me ba ma yo ma re sen pa che ma re ba yo ma re nam ju tam phe le chi la ko yo re ju mi ba ga ma ku bo ri si per nan zerma mi ba ke zerma ya ga mi ba ke hin 공본 도와스 현 간다 장보인스나 양문나 코 제제 양문나 자와 그 힐 야가 진 도와스 인제만 나오지 야가 현 간다 장보인스나 코 데스지 인제만 빼는 욕 돼서 휴 장보인스를 콜 책만 보여라 다 데이터지 유메 버그마 뇽뇽레 당가랑 저때 말 봤다 따당 된다고 요래 저等于 양 소수문이 맞참알 중요래 알아 요 내가 좀 지초 삼네 대제 야바나 대 레줌데 그 돈에 저랑 나 그냥 딴 거요 말에 대인도 맞참아 중진 리상 파라야데 뇽르당 소소라니 게 중나 철 좀어때망 자 쪽바이나 대 소소 야젠로 요래 소소 야젠로 야 소소 중데 망보 제당 알아 수된 좀모가 되는 좀모 직 파티네 저런 노르송스 좀모 직 마도 파티 더 말 좀모 솜데 그 철카 거더요데 저런라 말 노트지 요나 저 노트 솜도다 스므로 차대 요로와 대문에 잔네 좀모랑 그때 라마요나 우유 그트라지리 간서 저런 그 담보 말 준도 세드 저런 준 통지 게 로데야 준로와 데네 저 그때 제 zugang chi ma to chung de kan hyong wa de chung ni ba ro chung cha so de de chung ge he la kun zin ron zin de wa chung sun ba cha so da de da ji yin zang nga zu da cha ma la chung yu zang chung de da da par chi go yo res
so in general human beings are a little bit strange because we make a mistake and we even know that it was wrong, but then we do it again and again. And then we always make this mistake. So some people, not everyone is the same. There are some people who who do that, or there's other people who do make a mistake, but then eventually they recognize that that's actually wrong, and then they put that aside, and then they will not do it again, and they change. And that is just the nature of things. If we recognize and put it aside and not do it again, it's just the nature of things that then oneself will change. So we have to regret. The beginning is to regret in the negativities. And so then also, so we are regretting faults. And we also have to remember that there is really nobody who has no faults and who only has qualities, good qualities. There is no one who doesn't have any flaws, any faults. So there is this saying, it says, a person that has no faults is rare. Just like a completely smooth tree trunk. So even if the tree trunk is completely straight, like from afar, it looks like it's flawless, it's completely straight. But then when you look at it closer, the trunk itself is not completely smooth, not completely straight. That you will always find some, I see like wrinkles. I don't know if trees have wrinkles, like some cracks in the tree trunk. So everyone has some faults, even there are some small faults. So this is how we should see it, how we should view others, that they also have good qualities, and everyone has faults. But on the other hand, we should also not think that, oh, everyone has faults, so I can also have faults, there's no problem. So when you think in that way, then karma is not going to give you a free pass. So everyone has faults, and if you think in this way, then your criticism against others will also diminish. On the other hand, if you point your finger at someone, criticizing them, you're actually 3 fingers point back towards you. So 1 finger, the 5 fingers points at the other person, and 3 fingers point back to you. So which means that even though the other person might have a fault, that's 1 fault, 1 finger. But you have 3 faults, 3 fingers. So it's not because of, you don't have 3 faults because of the 3 fingers, but actually there is some relation when you think about it. So first of all, you're pointing your finger at all. You're just thinking that, oh, this person is doing something wrong, that's wrong. Your critical thought is your first fault, the first finger. Then secondly, you expressing that, saying something to that person that is critical, criticizing them outright is the second finger, second fault. And then if you keep holding on to that and thinking about it and kind of having negative thoughts about that person, then that's the third finger, the third fault. So anyways, we all have faults, and these faults need to be purified.
So that lama give him time to labja mambo nong ta namba yin the lalin the tart le lapo the mandote yin ge jun la mata son rang ge yong tin la mata son rang ge yong tin la ta na ngajar chen ro ge se yin la jun ta na de ne ta robo tam je de ne men thun ba ma to thong to ko ma re son na yang se song ge yo re ta den du ta yin ngaran zu namjun ma la tan du yong tin ja cha tro jun ja cha nga yo na ja cha nga de yu ta ja cha jue wei yan de sa re yong tin ja cha tro jun ja cha ye yo na ma de yong tin jin de zhe go yo re se ta tan da bin de zo yong tin yin ge yong tin la da tan da ji go yo re Then rang ta chung la ta sen du ta hi gang la ta sun jin ba ten yang li de ju ba ji song ta sen khang ri bu nam yak thon sang ta ta ran ju ba chen bo ji de de wa na sen khang la jin no cham ra wa de ni yi me de wa Dong Hawa Kala Dong Hawa Rawaji Mariwe Sena, then Rauri did Dimbare. In a Sanje Tamke Bahibate Chula Techipo, Chijite Yomare. Karate and Tatia. Karate no Yurisina, Nimpo Kundu Juba Dobs. That Juran Jubaje Baggy, de my use. Then in Jubaje de Yana, the Juran Sam Kamedeva Tindi Chagri. Ta Nimpo Kundu Ju, Send the Karis, tell Nimpo Tin. Caroline Botin, oh, they had Diba Tesaya, Shapachi. Lujigon Diba Tesaya, Chancellor. Nagon Diba Tesaya, Shandundunge, Impasagi. Ijigon Diba Tesaya, Gomjagin, said that Rambakatoni. Then Nimpo Kundu Juputos, Nimpo City. Tambotesan. Nibat. Think it over. Nimpo Kundu Juputo. Tinita the Koran. Mare. Give out to it. Nimbotin, could Nimbo Yora. He died in Bozubas.
So actually we have all received many teachings, many words of advice from our lamas, our teachers, and still, it's still very difficult. It's not so easy to practice all of that. So it is said that do not look at the faults of others and do not look at your own good qualities. Because if you look at your own good qualities, pride increases. If you look at the faults of others, even if the other person, for example, is your friend, you will only see their flaws, and so you will begin to not get along with each other. So this is how we should view other people. So everyone has faults and qualities. But if breaking it down to like percentage, if the other person possesses 60% of good qualities and 40% of faults, then you should still regard that person as a good person in general, a person with good qualities. So one should look at the good qualities of others and look at your own faults. And as you mentioned before, recognizing your own faults, you regret. And so now this is also something maybe that is an advice given in like modern psychology. And someone tells you just regret, remorse, feel remorse for all the things that you have done wrong. And of course, when you feel remorse, when you regret something, then you don't feel good because you're regretting, right? So you're feeling uncomfortable, it makes you feel uneasy. So that's the first feeling that has to arise. But then the Buddha also gave us more. He did not just say, and now just feel bad about that, but he gave us more, something to do with that. Because if we maybe just stay with the psychology approach of just feeling bad, then we just sit there feeling sorry and feeling bad and just regretting. And if we keep doing that and not do anything else, then we will definitely get depressed eventually. So therefore, the Buddha gave then, once that feeling arises, that negative feeling, then we have to do something about it. And that's the second dharma, or second power, which is the power of the antidote, applying an antidote. So then it's basically we are getting ourselves back up. So we recognize I've done something wrong, that's not good, but now I have to do something about it. So then what can I do? If you have done something wrong with your body, then for example you can offer practice prostrations, or if you have done something wrong with your speech, you can recite prayers or mantras. If you have done something wrong with your mind, then you can meditate. So in any case, you apply an antidote.
Dan de nimpo kundu jubu dobsi kundu juba da hi gangla ji barwa nimpo hiba tsek de pe tsek nuba chimbo ji ri de yor de da buke na ne de gar chimbo cha de yor de kana ri sina nimpo si ta ni hiba tsek de ta ni bu dong re ta ni bu dong gar se ngarang so nyem der tam je la ni nyereng sen nga so ka ta la yong yor de ta ni bu dong de ndu 다 반사직 방고요는 디님보다 코로나 타니보 용통킨제 타니부터는 저와 용게 대그 방고요리마다 타른 보지 그 방도 말와 베나 따라 나랑스 난큰나 되네 니마 혀대완데게 디 니마데 그 주체데게 되네 혀소 자갑게 디 차람지 요고요나 이것도고요 말다라 코로나인 체요 말 나라는 나랑수 남과를 하다 니모 두되게 나랑수 따라 요서 사토니 차람지 요거나 그런 바쁘게 이겼다고 여러 그런이 체대요 타니 보면 안데 근데 난 님보 간다리스도 당에 뭐지라 책조 보지 라비나 다된 레모도 디찹라 니버도 책 잠보지 랍토고 이런 것도 추바 남다 자도 디간자들 책 잠보지 삼방 임바지 지요는 디찹도 삼바 잠보지 버트로마 직세 야바는 디sab든 버트로마 인다지 버트로마라고 심지 인다지 소잡 다 대지바는 님부 군도 주부터 시바데 쳇상고요레스
So the second power is the power of the antidote, and this term antidote is actually a very powerful word in the Tibetan. So it is Nyempo. And Nyempo means antidote, but the first syllable of Nyempo, Nye means also close, someone who is close. And also it is part of the word for a family member, someone who is very close to you. So a family member is like a Nyinder, so somebody, a Nyen is somebody who is very close. So antidote means close, is related to the word close, closeness. And that's very significant because where the antidote must be applied is close to us, toward those who are close to us. So if we want to abandon or remedy a negative action, then it has to be applied toward something that's close to us. If it's far away from us, if it's more like something abstract, we cannot abandon the negativity that way. For example, when here in the West, the sun is shining, so here in the West, the sun is shining, and somewhere in Asia, there's an ice block. So will the sun here in the West melt the ice block in Asia and in the East? It will not happen because it's too far away. The ice will not melt. But if you have an ice block here in the West and the sun is shining, then they meet, they're close, and the ice can melt. So, for example, what that means for applying the antidote toward something that is close. For example, if I said something unkind to someone else, first I recognize that this was wrong, and then I do something that is oppositional to it, is opposite to it. So for example, if I said something that's harsh, then I say something kind instead to that person. And if you do that, if you practice in this way, this is how a real Dharma practitioner would practice. Or for example, if you had a negative thought, then you replace it for a positive thought. So you apply the direct opposite of what you have done. Or for example, if you squished an ant, then you go and save the life of many ants. So you apply the exact opposite of what you have done.
Diana yinge che ta ngar so ke ma chik sempan ngo go an raw ji zuba ina sempan a diala digelin de deni sempa ji ne gemo ge go ya dela so ba ke le ga ji jo yo de so nga zo nan chong ji nin ge yo ma re de nin bo chang bu to ne nyam ni ji go de deni perna robo ni kaka je ne chama je ne kha je ya ba ina Rabrina Kurani Chunchum Champo Chaya Tabhichi Goyor, De Mazona Yatini, yin the ying at the rats and Champo Zoyala Sopa, and Rakitoni. Rabrina Kurani Champo Zogora. Yanama Yimbani and Champo Zoyala Sopata. Teniche Sosokachi Mazimba Rolane, Kahin Magic Ramni Gomojo, Mazimba Long Yabana. That Rabrina Pacomo Jano, the Jimatan. Then the Yapavi. They Mazumba in a Gomojote. When the Mother Tegora, Mother Tegora, when they take the Gorda, that what's Samson is up there that says a young penang. Natole Gale, the Raji, the sounds of the control, one get a Tubano, there's a younger yor. In Yamaka Hedinean, Gonda Lasso Bactone. The Chutone, some down the young yore. The Chunana or the Rason yor, Dijim Sing, Dechi go some son of Sonaji younger yorova, Madoke, young matter, Chizoglo. The Nari, that Gandar tell us over. Maransoke Dipa Ya, Hiban, the Tambo Tingo Sondoa, the Ting Pastivala. That when the Jacqueline la check that and I've been rogo your race.
Or for example, if you upset somebody, sorry. Drink a sip of water. Okay. So if you upset someone, so if you made somebody, if you did or said something that made somebody upset or sad, and for example you made them cry, then you do something opposite, something that will not make them cry but that will make them laugh. So maybe you say something funny to make them laugh and so on. And so these are small actions that you should not dismiss as insignificant. But it's important to really apply an antidote for everything. Or for example, if you engaged in divisive speech or you slandered someone, when you slander someone, then that causes one person not to like the other person. So then that kind of makes them be not friends. So ideally, the opposite of that would be to reconcile those two people. But even if that's no longer possible, you can reconcile two other people. Or for example, if you stole something, let's say you stole $10, then ideally you would you would give back $100, and ideally to the person you stole it from. Or for example, sometimes when we work, it's possible that we get a little irritated with each other and then we fight a little bit. So then we should apologize for that, at least after a few days. And so if we are Dharma practitioners, we think in this way. When we think about the Dharma, then this thought arises in the mind, thinking this, I should really do this. We know that this is what we should do. So this is how we should think when we are confessing negativities. So we lay them aside and then we do something about it. So basically, as we go about our lives, we kind of apply the exact antidote to anything wrong, the direct opposite to anything wrong that we have done.
Tene penan changdroa hiba de yin junju jibandare. Tene mamambo pa ne tichoga kanza je tene junju na je khen ko ngo cha go anda hyu ji zubaina. Tin ti ki chap do kare go yorisina. Tene yang mamambo yosane ti kanza de yungtin de maru ju ta te ta go yore. Then changdro da la mambo yore digba chane san ta wa ina. Changdro hidita. Perna Chora mambo che kuyap tang gammi chindu satela chora gamma mambo pani che ta data ve chezoglo kuyap me pa kanam jertin bana ten changro wa chag yorwa teni maje chertan zapa drog song yore mambo ko korndu ma tel chora chu ma ju se mambo ko kor ma tel chu ju ning ma res tar so chong ra gres 가인스 뭐 망부 라 도쇼 요리 뭐 망부 그 콜 간자들 용딘 지지 통대와나 저게 되라 제 깨작 그 술사다 남절라서 복통이 되니 디마티 쭝진 반다베지 말라 파팅 띵바이나 마방복 주랑의 주랑 통로고 요래 다 대소 직딩 그 차는 제 깨장라고 제대wan라고 차성대 이나양 추그도니 데레 용디마 주 대님보 띵당더라와
And then another one is kind of exposing faults of others in public. For example, if there is a group of people and you are exposing the faults of others in the front of this group of people, then that will maybe cause some embarrassment for the person you're criticizing. And so instead of that, the direct opposite of that would be to speak about that person's good qualities in a group of people. So everyone hears about their good qualities. Or another way of the kind of negative exposure is that if there's a person who is generally respected by most people, then if you would criticize or kind of show a disrespect toward that person in front of all those people, that would also not be good. Batu Rinpoche had said, do not speak about the faults or expose the faults of someone who is respected by others in front of others, because in the end, it will only be your loss. Because that person that you are disrespecting in front of others it's someone that these other people respect, that other people see good qualities in. And if you say something or if you act in a way that suggests that this person has some flaws, then these other people will also maybe begin to see your flaws, because it, even in a worldly sense, that's not considered well-mannered. But especially in a Dharma sense, we should, instead of exposing others' faults, speak about their good qualities.
다데 다브는 간타르 님복군 주부터 시바데 메게벨레스 사야바텔라 님복 게벨레 자침보사바데 차송아 게벨레 쭝르지바데 다디 오드 숨바데 가레르스나 소르주부터 없어 소르주버스부터 데 가레르스는 단데 당에 친체 무지부 담자고 데레 친체 당에 지금은 소르주부터 다랑하는 소 돈발이 안데 사마 소르주부터로 차대요래 그런서 코와 토마미 바는 코와는 참대야데 다 지금은 세데 돈발이 요르바 잠도 돈바니 존데테니 소장하서 돈바 탐체 소르주부터 차게요래 대인자 다 친체 무지부 담자 히바데 네 고요레스.
So that is the power of the antidote. So it is an antidote to our negative actions, which means to be diligent in virtuous actions. And the third power is the power of commitment to not again repeat this action in the future. So that means to take a vow, to really a commitment, thinking I will not do it again in the future. Actually, all the vows that we take belong to this power of commitment. So we think that these negative actions, this is why I have been wandering in samsara since beginningless time. And as an antidote, we take a vow. So all these vows of the Pratimoksha Bodhisattva vehicle and the Vajrayana vehicle, starting with the refuge vow, all are this third power, the power of the vow or the commitment. So it is basically a commitment, a promise that I will not do this again.
소르주 히바데 가르스는 소르 난동 가르스나 소소 양다바 담보이나 데 란자네 데네 디파네 양마다 벤지바서 파추스나 미바서 데타비 차다요레 다들 펜손지 히나 추랑 담보 다 추랑 록송킹 그마마리 록송킹 록요앙아라서 lok sungkin ke ma into chu lok se yo ma churang lok ma se be ti chani churang luju go ni zama dik chani zama be de yor barwa ta di jin cho ke je jin jing chen lok ji su go ba yin churang lok sungkin cha chang wa ta zok bu na cha song ta di sur chu bu top hi ba de chu ju ba xian ne ta hi gang la di nin bo ni yo ba de ye ya bi ju dang chan ne dio de xin che me zhe dam jia xian ne da nyam ni jin du churang ngu ma de rang jia cher cha ge yo ne ta hi la yin ba ju ba xie ba ne chu rang jia ma yung di ji cher cha ju yo re dan de re da ra de top sun ba de sor chu
So this that term here for that direct term for the commitment to not repeat this action in the future is sorjuba, sorju, which literally actually means, so the first syllable sor has to do with like how we were originally, like the original condition. And then chu, the second syllable, means to kind of go back to that. So you're going back to your original state. So your original state is completely pure, and that's how you actually are. And then something arises that is negative, impure. And so when you purify that, then you come back to your original pure condition. So, for example, if you do not kill sheep, then you are not a sheep killer. So you're not a butcher. So you don't have that impurity. You're pure of that. And then if something happens, and due to a condition, you are forced to kill a sheep, you have become a sheep killer. So now you're a sheep killer. And then you stop killing sheep. You don't do it again. So you take a vow. So now you're coming back to how you were originally, your original condition. So it's just like that. So we, first of all, we recognize the fault, and then we apply the antidote as before. And then we take a commitment to not repeat this action again. So this brings you back to your original state.
Tene da Tio the Toby Batela, Nimpo Martin Dobson, Tins around the Naranzo, Yampa his Chisak Yurjila, Dune, Tene, Yabachi Mandare. Tell top si said that Deraki and Yabachi not top yours. Top si the Pin Chia yours, debated the Jobota to Gray, Zamata to Gray. So that thing the Dara, thing to top the Chirtan Naranzo. Ngune chibda na yakhunde tene de papa ganza yungdin de dimba nyamlin de dimba ndala ngarang so chi tena perna changdo wan do cha so na tene ganza yungdin jin je jurang ge mama bum de ne ngune korang ge jungju je ba yang na korla jung yu rin don don do je ne tene gandar ta mambo ji ya yo ku ya min pa ke tena la ka mambo ji ya yo ro tena do ji chor so ma ina jurang 다 디 간자든데는 무슨 존에 당아 대뒤 양문가 말해보 왕게 주게 용딘데 토마송스 양은 가 대소수 하고 그래다 해당 왕게 된다 차송 양은 가자 왕게 차송 양은 차도 왕게 차송스 디 간자데 라마 파샤바지 바이나 네 협 딘지도 냠리지사 야슈테레 수마레 데니 대 간다 차거스는 디 간자데 빼는 파부 간자 장초선 바다지나 저랑 라슬락파르트 닝 제와데 제와데 용고요레 데니 저랑 그 혁바데 하장 그 당리 지토고 요르디 간자데 데데 냠들 코랑 그 게와데 데니 조장도 뭐 용고요레 데 텔데니 저랑 그다 사자 딕바지 사순데 한 지니데 게와야 보지 차송로와 데 가르침 뭐 차도 요레 데니 가시 다양 데라게 지 진드라 만존바이나 간자데 무스드라 히아이바 지스가 고가 마존바이나 Then down around the like good tanga down. Then the yigi the chuk bought the sundunayang yabaji chogores.
And then the fourth power is the power of support, and that is the the object or the kind of the person toward whom we are directing our confession. And it's also called a power. So the power of support is a power because it's the practice of that makes it more beneficial, and purification is quicker. So the best power of support, which is the person to whom we confess, ideally it's the person that we, for example, have exposed the fault of. So, for example, if that is a person who has actually great qualities and as a practitioner, and if we are exposing their faults, for example, in a group of people, if we try and point out their faults, maybe we say something critical, or maybe we act in a way that suggests that we think that he has faults, or there's all kinds of things that we could do. So if we have done anything like that, the best thing would be to go directly to that person and apologize and say that it was because I was controlled by ignorance, that I didn't see your qualities. Or you can say it was because I was angry, so you know yourself why you did it. So I was angry, or I was prideful, or I was jealous, and that's why I did it. And then you confess, or you apologize. And that's actually this direct confession that is directly toward that individual, that person that you offended in any way. So apology or confession is always best when it's done directly to the person in question. And then if that person is a bodhisattva, especially, then their compassion for you will be even greater than before. And of course, they will accept the apology, the confession, and then they will even dedicate that virtue of yours toward complete enlightenment. So then in this way, negativity has come back to virtue, and so that's very important. But then if due to the circumstances it is not possible to go directly to that person, then the next best thing you can do is to confess in the presence of a holy object, like a statue of a deity or a tanka or Dharma scriptures and so on.
Yang that tensi bare. Nona chancho sambata solo chunju je de na yaksa marewe sikain son koran zoke zupa gomba la sopa to soke je teni chorang ninje gomya la sopa ke piyun do asamna nda mare tahi te kandari sin ngene lamdo ya de chorang la yang dikpa hya ke skul long ke samno tang ti ke namjor thamji gewar cha de koran chancho sambata da ti kanza te yongding ji de ke yang kulong tang chama gewa cha andu teni Korani choda oma na yi chadu teni teni nre yong yo re teni choda cho proba gang na teni oma proba ka sina choda pa mang da oma da cho ka re na mang ro ro ja cher ro tena yi tag yo res de chorang ke de ta hi jancho sum ba ta bi ju ju je de na jancho sum ba de da dong chorang nin ji de zu ba gom do yo re de de ba ha chi chim bo son ji tin sung go gon je no song do de ka re se na de chorang ke kulhong da chile chama dibare korang ke kulhong da chile chama geware da gewa digba ni teni choda do ni trete tawana yi da ka che trog na ya teni do de chona phan de na ngo ye mi cha jun ma ra da di na yin ji cha de yo re de yin za nam ju ngarang zo ke ngu da ju ka sa ka ne te yong tin din bi ji wo tham je la ra re no ku khin kor go re de ma zo na ya ju dan chang ro an de zapzam je ma je na teni gantar teni rempe teni soso la tamda makha tang ta tenra ke che mundu ba mangbo jin jogo yo re te so tham je le tam ngin pa tang ta teni te re ta ten du ta gantar chong ganza de ngus pa hyak ba chi nen ro sa ro me je na per na kaza jin den chong ko mo jo ko ma jab ya na teni jin ko le hyak ba chi sa ro me na ka re chi go re se te trawa yo go yo ro kon ro tsar na teni ka re chi go re se na korang ge nam de pun chi du so la yang tra hyak ba chen na ping go yo re se
Then it's also possible that one might think in this way. So one might think that But then isn't it better for the bodhisattvas if we criticize them a little bit, because it benefits them, right? Because then they can practice patience and compassion. But that's actually kind of wrong to understand, wrong understanding, because when you, so you're first you have done something wrong, and then you have regret. You regret and you want to confess. So that's a virtuous state of mind. So then if you think in this way, then your mind is virtuous. Then the bodhisattva has great qualities. So his motivation is always virtuous. So in this way, when your meeting is like the meeting of two virtuous minds, which is like pouring water into milk. So it can, if you pour some water into milk, it will just make the cup fuller. So it can perfectly mix. But even if you would criticize that bodhisattva, of course the bodhisattva will still be able to practice patience and compassion, but you are creating a lot of negative karma, negativity. Chikden Somgen said that in the Gongchik. The negativity of criticizing a bodhisattva is particularly grave. And so that is because your motivation and then what you do with it is negative, and that bodhisattva's motivation and what he does is always positive, virtues. So when they come together, those two minds, it is like water meeting with a rock. It doesn't matter how much you try, you'll never be able to mix it, the water and the rock. It's just the nature of those things. So whether it is directly or indirectly, ideally we will always be respectful toward others and see their good qualities, especially somebody who possesses great qualities. But at least we should not point out their faults or criticize, expose them in public. Because if we are not careful when it comes to that, then it's possible that in the future, as a result, then you yourself will get a bad reputation and people will criticize you and so forth. So again, in the best case, ideally, you would go to that person that you have criticized directly and apologize and confess. Or for example, if you have stolen like $10 from someone, you would go to that person directly and apologize. But if that's not possible, for example, the person already left somewhere else, then the next best thing is maybe to go to, if there's some like close ones around, like family members and so on, then you can go there and confess.
다 샤바지사데 간사 제발 통보 직보를 샤바지 그 마보트서로 고 말해베세나 더 말이스 마보트서로 샤바 나랑서 고요를 락바르도 고요르다야 가레지 페나 초랑그 고 직세바인다 초랑 추소 페나 추소 따위는 추소 가네 제가 랑그 고이나야 그래서 야세 마자도 근데 히팅 거주 같이 뭐래 그래서 간스나 겐둔바지 또대 응우버 차도 요도 되네 대 같이 뭐제래 그 협지 거제대 대 초산으로 저런 그 협진 다대 추초 당상 집보 말이 저런 수수 그 고데 개콘도서 야세 마자도 갈래 자고 요 잡자지네 자자마제 톨라노르 페샤 톨라노르 된 마히나 히그러와 대 저런 마 단지 저런 그 단징 그 저런 람도 요라티 ngaranzu dancing gona ngaranzu dancing ngaranzu lakku yo te thola no de nga pecha rosong thong do san de zabza chigero tel las jirbaji ti pa la hla yo re si te ha go da go da ge khong ke soan do so la hla chang mi ba ro hla si da main ta re kan da ye da no ji re kan da chang mi ba yo re koran so lo chorang ke hinang da ngam ra ji go shob ja shob se da kai ke se yo yo de nin se wa se yo so ju yo yo ma mo je 다소제에는 그런 속에 줄 가르치 있다고 그랬으나 물론 린차 나랑 쏠 농도야 도 간다를 찌는 호아리데 찌는 협바에 해요래 물론 린차 시지도 코리온 거요래 되네 맞수 드라 마제나 협바 마제나 물론 린차 코론도 되네 다 Te chik lavya yore na maringane na yak tu chu la ma rawo che mala na ya na ngaran zu champa ki season chik zdo champa ya ya no de season ji do de matala ngane so so champa jab de wa ro tene ta tenare te te hya maringane hya sen ta namju che lavya te ngane re blong lin cha ka wang ka na chang ro yor ta no churang ka langkor ji go dang ge khon tu so te da za za ji ka le ti po ji je ni so so te tin hi tin de gom cha de yore ini so so ge jyo de song job cha de yore som ni churang ke blong lin cha de yang ren ro de yore wa o ta de so ka chim boris
So does that mean that we only have to confess to somebody who is higher than us, and not somebody like a normal person who is kind of lower, ordinary? Certainly, it does not mean that. Actually, especially, we must confess, especially to those who are like ordinary or lower. For example, if you're in a Dharma center, you open the temple doors and you close the temple doors, it's important to be mindful when you're opening and closing the doors. It's generally a place where the Sangha meets. So in such a place, anyways, we try to be more respectful to accumulate merit. But it's not just about Dharma centers and temple doors. It's also, for example, when you're at home and you're opening a window or a door, then to practice mindfulness, you should do it carefully and slowly. And even in a mundane sense, it would make sense to do it that way, because if you always slam your doors, then the door will break eventually. And because we also have a lot of self-grasping and attachment, that will cost a lot of money that we don't want to waste. So even if it's just out of self-grasping, we want to be careful when we're opening and closing our doors and windows. And moreover, from a Dharma perspective, actually, it is said that in each door and window, there are actually countless gods and spirits, like hungry spirits. So there are actually beings everywhere, and they are all afraid of you slamming the door. And it is said that sometimes when we slam the door, we actually, every time even though there is many, but every time we slam it, then we're killing one of those beings that are inside the door. And also, such heedful activity is also related to paying back our karmic debt. For example, that's the purpose of doing the smoke offering, which we do for the deceased and the living. For one, it is a dedication. For one, it is a confession. And so, for as long as we have not purified or paid back our karmic debt, we will always be surrounded by karmic creditors who come to collect their karmic debt. And one sign of that is, for example, that you get sick when it's not time to be sick. So what it means, for example, is it's not flu season, but you still get the flu. Or you die when you're not supposed to die, and so on. So things that kind of randomly happen is because there are those karmic creditors who come to collect their karmic debt. So it's good to be always mindful. Also, for example, even when you're opening your car doors or windows, you do it carefully and slowly and with mindfulness. And in this way, everything becomes really meditation practice. So that's number one. So everything becomes practice. Number two is you're also protecting those beings, like those who live in the door and so on. And then thirdly, you're also, every time you're careful, you're making this baggage of karmic debt a little bit lighter.
That's what I'm saying. I'm doing around so thing hitting go chahiri ma da che yang tiso che karala guru chungju da che na te la ku yo marwa o chron chung te da se ne lab to go mar kan sin ngarang ju dela ma yo wa ti jum sen la jek tere teni ta namju pupa ke jek labter yo re sa kolan dal ma tem ro ya ke semra ma da de churang kong pa po de yang jin pu si kale ya chi zo lo da da de chimbo ma jis teni nam hu mon dala ya churang go thong ro ya ke semra ke ma do de nam hu mon do nang ka dala churang go ya thong do li tin semra ke yo ma re ko an thong bo re se ina gu gu him him chi song se ya ji yo re de chi nam hu mo la tuk do me de gu gu him him sa sa to mo la de do dem ne ma de do me de yang da ya chi zhe ga da ta de da de zo ka hi chu no ji ri chu lab zan lo rin do wo de nga zo gong pa bo de de da ba da chim bo de da je ba yin na de ne ta na de jiu de so san tang ji go do jiu de so chuan ro tong ka lan ro sa de nga zo ba da ba de da chim bo ja pe na chuan chu din je ko lan ro yo ba yin na ya ngo ne di ka zo par ta jiu de so ga pa ka la sa ma sa ko ran so hip de pa ya we de yo Then 나저 거지 개와 거는 거 주디 거는 거 다다 비다 첨부 주디 거서 배도 거는 희난 게 드라운드도 드라리스냐 주줍사냐 득바사 안로 요러와 근데 대 많이 바가다 주지 포말 심진 인다 대다버리 근데 로 뭐이나 카헤베 초와 눈보리 근데 스틱리트는 남산 마데와 차노다 또 상당네 제가 저 장조선 양린 진행진 임바차네 잡자지고 요레세
So I'm just mentioning that as a kind of a reminder of mindfulness on an ongoing basis. Of course, I'm not saying that to point out your faults, like saying, so you're doing this wrong and that wrong and so on. It's actually also really my faults. I have many more faults. Anyways, in Tibet, there's also one saying, which is actually quite a Dharma teaching. So they say that, the Tibetans say that, when you walk very, very, very carefully, very, very slowly. The 공박이 앞에 가래 쉬고 민독 가래 쉬고 민독 샘트고 가래 샘트고 말이.
The sakolama temper is and the sonoma temper is my
So when you walk, you don't have to worry about like sinking into the ground. So basically you have to walk like very, very carefully. So because otherwise you will sink in the ground.
사콜라마 템들 디심다 요마르라 쳤다. sabza simji yin ke teza yid mong ba chang ra chu dik da ba
mare yin yang di tampetina la
sa kola chon ma tem nge chorang ro de zab zab chi la khu yos te nga sa kola sem da lang te ma chorang ro de tem ro de ting la ni
sa de sorry so when you walk on the ground, walk carefully and very softly, very gently. So they're saying, I'm not saying that because not I'm worried about you, but I'm not worried about the ground sinking down, but it's better to be mindful when you're walking on the ground. And then when you walk, you don't have to worry about the sky falling on your head. But still, you should walk very mindfully in kind of maybe a little bend, which is a kind of a sign of respect in Tibet. So it's because, of course, the sky is very high, and there's no danger that the sky will fall on your head, but you should walk like the sky would fall on your head. So it's like when the sky is on your head, then you can't really fit like into the sky, I guess. You can't really be straight because the sky is on your head. So that's why you have to walk a little bend. So that's how you should walk, which is walking respectfully. And so that's really important whenever we walk anywhere. For example, when we walk, like we kind of walk really carelessly and we just like trample along, and then there's birds that are just peacefully sitting there drinking water and eating food, and when you come trampling, it scares them away. Or for example, when you go around the stupa, the birds behind the stupa are sitting there very peacefully, very relaxed and drinking water and eating food, and you're walking around the stupa, even though you're doing that, of course, because you think it's virtuous. But if you just like trample around the stupa really fast, then that will scare away the birds and they will all fly away. So that's just an example, and it applies to anything, really, anything that could disturb others. For example, there are some people who are extremely, like the feeling is extremely sensitive, and anything you do will bother them immediately. And so then we have to think about that, and especially since we are practitioners of Bodhichitta, practicing like bodhisattvas, we have to be very careful.
Rita Tarang Kanan Kan Lab Yung Sai Sama Tata, that Lalita Toyakale Kabo Yorite, then Katse Tuptandra Jira, Natsok, Tambo Mahipa, Hiparaji, Hipa Dinani, Katse Tuptogal, Dani, Nyami Jena, Remjita, Yarjendro, Yarjendro, you batting around to draw me Shipadella, number to be Hirap Zachimboje, you bare. There down to Pagetini, around up and a zoo system gene as at the Solon Rodia Deni, Nganetane. Simjin Kangdoa, Simjin Mambo. The Solon Rodia, Hither Pire Ronkin Mambo, Huendoa. Didn't know Ronkin Maya, such a Hither Pire, Papapon, and Ordo, that the so Nganetane, Jisuranchi go under Rake, the Navan Rock go to the Karchimbo, the train. So good to so party Dego Yunaya. 제 코란 소당 타니루 소탁다 사비는 파르데데 지고도 뭐세 카나미낭 잘 파슈 쩌네 뭐데 나츠 파데 듬두 쳔보요르데 코란소 현황로 지소나 드니양 야봄마도 다원데 속차도서 다 나소 그지 게완나레 이네야 짜 쳔보로 쩌네 드나 톱다나 야보요레 인 남바지 임베차니 then mantra to sotesa Koranso Amchona Lotan Yaboyori Samsons.
So all of those things that I just mentioned, of course, it's difficult to practice them all the time, but just try to practice them as well as you can, just do your best. And first of all, recognize those things that you don't know, and then once you know them, practice them as well as you can, and then naturally your state of mind will improve. And that's a quality, an ability that we have as human beings because we possess intelligence. We have a way to improve ourselves, and this discriminating awareness that we have is very precious. For example, when people go to the zoo to see animals, when people usually in the zoo when they walk around in the zoo, they walk around very quietly and carefully and gently. And that's also one thing I rejoice in. And when they want to take pictures of an animal, they don't just like go straight up and take a picture because that would scare the animal, but they approach the animal really slowly and quietly so they don't scare the animal, and then they take a picture. And so this is also one thing that we can consider virtuous. And if you are like a Buddhist and you see an animal, then you can also recite a mantra so they can hear it, for example, the Mani mantra.
다 간다르 또 이게도 휴신 말이 또 이연한테 가르침보 휴차를 휴지 본보 제트 이동 하고나양 top yate ha mauna tene ngara so dikpa hya ju de gage la de yo bare ya taphi chena yang hira hya to ku yo mare ne den da top ye nang ke nenga chi hyu dang nam ju nga so la len la te chang kingel ma ta ba ne ni yor te kare ri sina top dambo number sun jin ba top dang de yo de sor ju ba top se wa ji yo wa di ni de ri da de ni ning ma da ta ye la ma dambo de ju ba ni ba de sin che mi ji ba dom sam ju ba da dom sam de ni cha do yo ri dom sam si de chuan ta ji de dom wa ji lin de la gu yo ma sim to ni ba mi ji sam ya ge dam ja de yo go yo re da de ni nenga cha do yo re.
So these are the 4 powers to confess or purify our negativities, and they are extremely important. Because even if you might know about the 84,000 Dharma teachings, you know all about it, if you don't really understand those 4 powers well, then you will be left without really being able to purify and lay aside your negativities. Even if you try to confess them and lay them aside, it will be difficult to fully purify them. So those 4 powers are critical, and of those 4, 2 are most important. Even if you cannot practice all 4 of them all the time, but 2 of them are really critical in order to purify our negativities. The first one is the power of regret, and the second one is the power of commitment. So these are actually quite similar, although they have different names. So first, we regret, we feel remorse for the wrong we have done. And second, a commitment to not again repeat that action in the future. And this mind of having a vow does not actually necessarily mean that you have to take an actual vow. It just means that you promise to yourself in your mind, I'm not going to do this again.
Da de dra song re dama ta sunna kepe dikpa je yang si kepa si ji de dikpa Khenpo ji je ba yin na ya rebe de yang ren ro go yo re si dan de ning ga de hyak ba ji ro yo ra hyak ba ha kon de lun bu dikpa yang da chong yang je什么 ro do da de re lon bo de dikpa chung chung ji se ba yin na ya de ni rebe ji mo chang ro go yo si rebe ji go chen bo ga re si na ko dikpa de hyak ba ji hi yo ma hyak ba ji ma hi de dikpa de ran ja la di kala da dikpa ka che yo ba de ya sa no go yo ro da de na rin ro de di jimsin de nga so ke di dikpa la hya ju yo ba de ha ko wa hya li hya dang ha ko wa da ji go re da de pe na nga ran so meni la chorang ko go mo chö chö meni la go mo chö re te ra do lo chö re kansa che de ge chorang lo ni go mo chö lang wa re lang ni ga ling re de ji ba re chorang ge ni ga le te re yin na yang 간사 지디게 델 빠빠게 저랑 뭐하지 요마다 델 빠빠게 고랑게 되저 그래 샥바 진로도 되고 대속게 되게 코르스에다 네 가서 코르스는 니가 니바 좀 뭐요 벤 저랑 많은 라서만 도로세 대표야도 대속게 되네 대도 되네 간 고모죠 수바라 찍바차도 요르데 득바 양지 요르 되네 제대가 인다 인 삼삼라고 지원 제 랑송하다 제대가 단된 샤자 닝제 라서부터네 되네 랑송하 되니 만라바 요르바 다도 소소는 당네 간사다 득바 샤 소 남야 공킨데 다 하고스 냠니 남킨데 라 쇼요 다 모킨제 야르왕은 데마도
It is said in the scriptures and the teachings that a wise person might have a heavy negativity at first, but that heavy negativity results in light, as a light result. And that is because a wise person understands confession. A stupid person has a small negativity but a big result, because they do not understand confession. And so they don't understand, first of all, they don't understand that's a negativity, then they don't understand that they should confess it and purify it. So then that negativity remains with them, and on top of that, they create more and more negativity. So first we must understand negativity and then want to confess them. And then we also need to know how to confess them. For example, there's two people, let's say two lamas who are doing prayers for other people. So if you give each of them $10 to do some prayers for you, the first one, so both of them take it, and that's the same. But then the first one will dedicate the merit of you giving that $10, and also he will confess, because he's taking you're taking the money from somebody else, right, to do some practice. Then he will also confess, and then the other one will not think anything and will just say like, oh yeah, of course, and just take it. So that person does not know confession. So the first one, the difference is that the first one understands the point and takes the money with compassion, whereas the other person does not. And Jitsu Milarepa said that when you confess with a strong regret to the gods, to the deities, the Buddhas, then any negativity will quickly become purified. And so that is the point, that we can purify our negativities. And that is what all the Buddhas and all the Bodhisattvas have said, agree upon. So we might have committed some negativity, but it's important to confess it and lay it aside. And then the next section in the text is the purpose of practicing the branch of confessing negativities. And so that is that the reason why we have to do it is because by doing it, by confessing, we are giving up our negative, non-virtuous mind, and also giving up our negative mind. We apply antidotes of practice, and we are increasing our positive, our virtuous mind. So that completes the branch of confession. We take a break here. Then Dedications in the Yellow Prayer Book on page 11. By this merit may I attain omniscience, having defeated the enemies, my wrongdoings. May I liberate all beings who are tossed in the ocean of samsara by the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. And then in the Blue Prayer Book, page 64, 21, verse 21. May every being ailing with disease be freed at once from every malady. May all the sickness that afflicts the living be instantly and permanently healed.
Thank you very much.